America has small towns that look like postcards, but they can also be the kind of places that give you chills even with the lights still on. This video is top 10 creepiest small towns in the US, places that seem so gentle by day you might want to move there, but that at night begin to reveal lingering legends. The cold traces of old industrial disasters and true stories that keep people awake. From the legend of a strange creature that brought down a bridge, to the tale of a church rumored to be a link between the earthly world and hell. And those are only two thin slices of the bigger picture, so right now we're starting with the first town to see what that peaceful surface has really been hiding. Number 10. Point Pleasant, West Virginia. On a good day, Point Pleasant looks like a postcard with better lighting. It is a small city and the county seat of Mason County, sitting right at the confluence of the Ohio and Kanawha rivers. The 2020 census puts it at a little over 4,000 people. Small population, big atmosphere, and that geography does something to a story. When two rivers collide, your brain automatically imagines a border. Not just of water, but of meaning. There is even an old historical echo here. Local tourism lore says George Washington once camped near this confluence during land surveys, and the gentle name Point Pleasant is tied to that memory. It is the kind of detail that makes the place feel grounded and sweet, which is perfect, because the best creepy towns are not born in darkness. They are born in places that should have felt safe. Then the myth arrives on schedule. The name that turned Point Pleasant into a cultural icon is Mothman. The most famous wave of sightings ran from mid-November 1966 to mid-December 1967, with reports clustered around the TNT area, a former World War II munitions site. Depending on who you ask, this was a winged omen with glowing eyes or an anxious community staring at the wrong silhouette in the wrong light. Some explanations point to large birds like sandhill cranes or herons. The story works either way, mystery on one side, plausibility on the other. That tension is rocket fuel for a legend. And then comes the date people cannot unfeel. December 15, 1967. The Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed in a disaster that permanently changed how many outsiders heard this town's name. The myth and the tragedy became tangled in public memory. Not because anyone proved a supernatural cause, but because humans are wired to search for meaning when the timeline hurts. Here is the modern twist that makes Point Pleasant feel even stranger. The town does not hide from Mothman. It leans in. There is a Mothman statue in the Mothman Museum on Main Street. There is also the annual Mothman Festival, held on the third weekend of September. A place once associated with dread now hosts daylight selfies and souvenir bags. That is not a contradiction. That is America turning anxiety into identity. Imagine walking downtown at noon, coffee in hand, sun on the river, and a metallic creature waiting for your camera like it never left. So what unsettles you more? The idea of a monster in the shadows, or a town that learned to live with the story and sell it back to us? Number 9. Stull, Kansas. Stull is tiny, but its reputation is not. It is an unincorporated community in Douglas County sitting near Lawrence and not too far from Topeka. On the map, it has been around since 1857, first known as Deer Creek, then renamed for a local postmaster. Today, there are far fewer buildings than you would expect for a place with this much noise in its myth. Here is the quiet backbone of the story. The cemetery and the church history run deep into the 1800s. A stone church was built in 1867, and a cemetery was laid beside it. Early services were reportedly held in German, which already gives the place that old-world gravity that American folklore loves to borrow. In 1922, the community built a newer church across the road. The old stone church faded into abandonment. Then came the spark that turned a rural footnote into a late-night dare. In 1974, a University of Kansas student newspaper story helped ignite the modern legend that Stull was a gateway to hell, with claims that the devil appeared on Halloween and the spring equinox. The idea spread faster than any crop rumor ever could. Suddenly, Stull was not just a cemetery, it was a storyline. But legends have consequences. Local reporting has noted that residents never signed up to be extras in someone else's horror road trip. Curious visitors, trespassing, and vandalism turned the myth into a real-world headache. In 2002, the old stone church at the cemetery was demolished. What remains is largely the foundation, which is almost poetic in a place where the myth has always been bigger than the structure. If you want the modern Stull atmosphere, it is not a jump scare. It is a refusal. Controlled access, warning signs, a clear message that this is a real burial ground, not a theme park. The town does not say, "Come explore." It says, "Respect the line." And in a strange twist of modern timing, the active church associated with the community reportedly caught fire on July 25, 2022, with no injuries and a suspected lightning cause. It was a reminder that you do not need demons for a place to feel fragile. Picture this: you pull onto a dark two-lane stretch expecting a quick legend selfie. You find a quiet cemetery, a missing church, and the kind of silence that feels owned. Your phone searches for signal like it is second-guessing the plan. The scariest thing is not what you might see. It is how strongly you feel you should leave. So which would unsettle you more, a supernatural rumor or a real community protecting its dead from our curiosity? Number 8. Jerome, Arizona. Jerome clings to Cleopatra Hill like it is daring gravity to make a decision. It looks down over the Verde Valley perched along SR 89A between Sedona and Prescott, about 100 miles from Phoenix. On paper, it is a small tourist and arts town. In memory, it is a copper boomtown that once held more than 10,000 people in the 1920s, with local history suggesting the peak may have pushed toward 15,000. In the 2020 census, the number is 464. The fall is so sharp it feels geological. This is not the kind of creepy that vanishes overnight. Jerome is creepier because it died slowly, then came back with a new face. When the mines closed in 1953, the population reportedly sank to under 100. The people who stayed organized built a historical society and fought to keep the place on the map. So Jerome did not disappear. It mutated. The town's 20th century story reads like a checklist of hard truths. Copper markets crash, hillsides shift, mud and fire leave scars. The environment keeps the aftertaste of heavy industry. You do not need a monster in the forest when the ground itself has a history of moving. That is why the sliding jail is the perfect symbol. Built in 1905, it started sliding down the hill after 1938. It is not a legend. It is architecture losing an argument with the earth. A jail that cannot stay put feels like a punchline written by the mountain. Then there is the building that turns history into a whisper. The old United Verde Hospital, built in 1926, now operates as the Jerome Grand Hotel. The concrete sits high on the hill and some original details remain, including an early Otis elevator. You can treat the ghost stories as folklore. The real chills come from imagining what this place once carried during the mining years. Picture this: you roll into town on a bright afternoon. Art shops and coffee smell like recovery. Then you spot the jail that slid, the hospital that became a hotel, the steep angles that make every building look like it is bracing for impact. The vibe is not boo. The vibe is, this place survived, and it remembers. So here is the real question. Is Jerome unsettling because of the stories people tell at night, or because the daylight history is heavy enough to stand on its own? Number 7. Monowi, Nebraska. Monowi is an incorporated village in Boyd County tucked into the quiet plains of Nebraska. It is also the smallest incorporated community in America for a reason that sounds like a punchline and feels like a chill. The 2010 census counted 1 resident. The 2020 data briefly showed 2, but that appears to be a privacy artifact. The reality most people repeat is simpler and stranger. Monowi is, for all practical purposes, a town of 1. That one is L.C. Eiler. This place started like many rail towns. Monowi was platted in 1902 when the railroad reached the area. It even had a post office from 1902 to 1967. At its height in the 1930s, around 150 people lived here. Then the long, familiar American story rolled in. Jobs shifted, young people left. The map stayed, but the community thinned until it became a whisper. Here is where Monowi stops being cute trivia and starts leaning into existential horror. Elsie is the mayor. She is also the clerk, the treasurer, and the librarian. She runs the only business left, the Monowi Tavern. Yes, this is the only place in America where your city hall meeting can be a conversation with yourself, and your mayor can legally sign a liquor license for the same person who will pour your drink. It is funny for 3 seconds. Then you imagine the silence after closing time. Monowi's entire functional universe fits into 3 points: Elsie's home, the tavern, and Rudy's library. The library was built in memory of her late husband and holds roughly 5,000 books. That detail is quietly devastating. A working library in a town with no patron base in the traditional sense. Shelves waiting for footsteps that rarely come. Stories preserved where the audience has mostly moved on. Picture the rhythm of a day here. A traveler pulls off a highway for a burger and a beer. The door opens, the lights are on. The conversation is warm. Everything feels normal for a moment. Then you realize the normality is carefully maintained by one person who refuses to let the town die on her watch. Monowi is not abandoned. It is maintained. That is the part that feels eerie if you stare too long. So is Monowi creepy? Not in the haunted house way. It is creepy in the way a heartbeat monitor keeps beeping in an empty room. If loneliness had a zip code, this might be it. Yet there is also something stubbornly hopeful about a single resident keeping a whole civic identity alive. A bar, a library, a government, and a memory, all powered by one set of keys. Number 6. Dudleytown, Connecticut. Dudleytown sits in northwestern Connecticut in the shadows of Cornwall inside a ridge and valley stretch called Dark Entry Forest. People call it a ghost town, but the real twist is simpler. Dudleytown was never an official town at all. It was a nickname for a small settlement where the Dudley family and their neighbors tried to carve a life out of stubborn land. The roots go back to the 1740s. Thomas Griffiths settled in the area first. Gideon Dudley and relatives followed around 1753. For a while, it was a tough pocket of farms and homes, scattered through thick woods and uneven ground. Then the math of survival changed. The valley was hard to farm. The terrain was rough. Water access was not convenient. When richer opportunities opened elsewhere and local iron prospects faded, Cornwall's population declined and this settlement thinned out with it. No dramatic single-day evacuation, just a quiet exit. The kind that leaves behind cellar holes, stone walls, and a silence that feels intentional. And that is where the legend moved in. By the late 20th century, Dudleytown became famous for the so-called Dudley Curse. Stories of madness, tragedy, and a bloodline marked by old European doom traveled far beyond. Connecticut. Local historians have pushed back on many of these claims. The noble lineage, the centuries-long curse narrative, the neat cinematic version of events. The folklore got louder than the paperwork. That contradiction is the real fuel here. Half warning, half curiosity. A myth that survives because no one can fully prove it, and no one wants to fully let it go. Now add the modern rule that makes everything colder. Since 1924, the land has been tied to a private forest association focused on conservation and reforestation. After years of trespassing and vandalism, owners closed it to the public. Walking in is not just a spooky choice. It is trespassing on private property. The scariest part is not a ghost in the trees. It is the sense that this place does not consent to your visit. Picture this. You hike into a forest that looks ordinary for 5 minutes. Then the trail goes quiet. You notice old foundations sinking into moss. A stone wall that leads nowhere. Your phone suddenly feels like an accessory instead of a lifeline. Dudleytown is creepy not because something is chasing you. It is creepy because nothing is welcoming you. So what unsettles you more? A curse that may be exaggerated or a real historical collapse so complete that the forest reclaimed the evidence. Number 5. Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Eureka Springs is a small city in the Ozark Mountains, one of the county seats of Cairo County. The 2020 census lists 2,166 residents. That is not a lot of people to carry this many stories. The town climbs steep hills with tight, curving streets and stacked houses, the kind of place that makes your calves work harder than your camera. Locals call it a stair-step town for a reason. It looks charming. It also looks like it was built to hold secrets in its stairwells. The origin story is almost too wholesome. In 1879, the Healing Springs boom turned this spot into a resort destination. People came for wellness, fresh air, and the promise that water could fix what modern life broke. The historic district still preserves much of that late 19th and early 20th century vibe, so much so that large parts of the city were listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1970. The past did not vanish here. It checked in and never checked out. And that is exactly why the night stories stick. The centerpiece of Eureka's haunted reputation is the 1886 Crescent Hotel and Spa. It is marketed as one of America's most haunted hotels, with ghost tours that lean hard into the legend. But the real chill is not necessarily paranormal, it is historical. In the late 1930s, Norman Baker turned the Crescent into a fraudulent cancer hospital. He sold false hope to desperate people. In 1940, he was convicted of mail fraud. When you stand in a place associated with that kind of deception, you do not need a sheeted ghost. The story already lives in the walls. Eureka Springs also has a second echo. Basin Park Hotel, opened in 1905, is another anchor for local ghost tales and tours. The two hotels form a kind of haunted corridor for visitors who want a thrill with their Victorian architecture. The town knows its brand. It does not hide from the rumors. It frames them with chandeliers and history plaques. Picture this. You walk a narrow limestone street at dusk. The lights glow warm against old brick. The hills fold the town into itself. You hear music from a bar, laughter from a balcony, and then the wind shifts and the whole place feels like a set. Built for two timelines at once. One is a wellness postcard. The other is a reminder that healing can be a business and sometimes a trap. So what unsettles you more? A haunted hotel story told for fun, or a real chapter of medical fraud that turned a place of hope into a cautionary tale? Number 4. Dogtown, Massachusetts. Dogtown, also called Dogtown Common, is an inland settlement on Cape Ann that belongs to Gloucester and partly Rockport. It is not a town you drive into. It is a town you walk into, and then wonder why the woods feel like they are keeping score. This place was settled as early as 1693. At its peak in the 1700s, Dogtown likely held around 60 to 80 homes. It was a real community, not a legend, not a spooky meme, a working, stubborn pocket of life in a harsh, rocky interior. Then the tide of history pulled people away. After the American Revolution, coastal trade and maritime work became stronger magnets. The inland settlement had less reason to stay full. By around 1828 to 1830, Dogtown was nearly abandoned. The last structure was removed in 1845. The town did not explode or vanish overnight. It simply thinned out until the forest had more votes than the residents. That quiet exit left a special kind of eeriness. Today, Dogtown is defined by emptiness with labels. You can find numbered cellar holes marking where homes once stood. That detail is unsettling in the most practical way. It turns a hike into a roll call of vanished households. You are not just walking through trees, you are stepping through coordinates of old lives. Then you meet the other signature of Dogtown, the Babson boulders. More than 30 massive rocks carved with short moral commands: truth, courage, kindness, prosperity follows service. The irony is delicious and a little haunting. A ghost settlement decorated with reminders for the living. As if someone tried to pin a code of conduct onto a place that no longer had a crowd to behave. Folklore adds another layer. The name Dogtown is often linked to stories of women keeping dogs for protection while men fought during the Revolution. Another version claims that as the community collapsed, abandoned dogs went feral and the nickname stuck. Then there is the darker campfire thread about Dogtown witches, where the last isolated residents were recast as cursed figures. Modern local writing tends to treat that as myth-making, the fashionable punishment for people who lived differently and too far from the coast. So Dogtown sits in a perfect tension. History says this is geography and economics doing what they always do. Folklore says the woods held something stranger. And your nervous system does not really care which explanation is cleaner when the path gets quiet and the stones start looking like punctuation marks. Picture this: you are walking on a bright afternoon. The forest is calm. Then you spot a cellar hole with a number, then a second, then a third. Your brain starts building a neighborhood out of absence. You read a boulder that orders you to be brave, and for a second, that feels less like inspiration and more like advice. So, what feels creepier to you? A whispered curse, or a town so thoroughly erased that its homes are now a numbered memory under your feet? Number 3. Helltown, Ohio. Helltown isn't an official name, that's the first hook. It's a label people pinned onto part of Boston Township in what is now the Cuyahoga Valley National Park area near Peninsula between Cleveland and Akron, the kind of place that should be weekend hikes and soft river light. Instead, it became a rumor with a zip code. The real turning point starts in 1974. That's when the valley became a national recreation area, later upgraded to a national park in 2000. With that change came the hard machinery of policy, land purchases, relocations, and the quiet dread of eminent domain. Local reporting says the National Park Service bought more than 300 houses out of roughly 750 in Peninsula and Boston Township. That number alone can make a town feel like it was erased mid-sentence. And here is where the myth machine does what it always does. Empty homes become a story vacuum, barricades and warning signs turn into plot devices. People don't see a complicated land transition, they see a secret. So the urban legends arrive like they were RSVP'd. A satanic church, a haunted school bus, crybaby bridge, even the infamous Peninsula Python. You don't have to prove these tales to understand their function. They are the smoke. The audience waits for fire. But the most unsettling twist isn't supernatural, it's historical. Krejci Dump operated as a junkyard and waste site from 1948 to 1980 and reportedly accepted hazardous materials. The NPS bought the property in 1985 and later discovered major contamination that required long-term cleanup. This is the moment the story flips from spooky tourism to real-world unease. You don't need demons when you have industrial secrets and decades of environmental consequences. And then the modern reality softens the visuals but sharpens the vibe. Many of the abandoned structures linked to the Helltown image were reportedly demolished around 2016. So today you may not find the same cinematic row of decaying houses you expected. What you find instead is worse for the imagination, the feeling of absence with a backstory. Picture driving past a normal stretch of parkland, no dramatic ruins, no obvious monster lair. Just trees, quiet roads, and the knowledge that a community once lived here, then got folded into a national project that the internet later turned into folklore. So what scares you more? A nickname that sounds like a horror trailer, or the reality of a place reshaped by policy, fear, and a cleanup story that was real enough to outlive the rumors? Number 2. Dawson, New Mexico. Dawson sits out in Colfax County, about 17 miles northeast of Cimarron. Today it is a ghost town, but it was built to be the opposite of ghostly. It was a company coal town stitched to the railroad designed for thousands of working lives to rise and repeat on schedule. The mine opened in 1901. In 1906, Phelps Dodge bought the operation and expanded it. For a while, Dawson didn't feel like a remote dot on a map. It felt like a machine that could run forever. A hospital, hotels, a baseball field, school sports, the kind of place where the future sounded simple. Dig, earn, build, sleep, repeat. Some accounts even describe Dawson as one of the largest company-owned towns in the Southwest. That is the first irony. A place created by industry, scaled for crowds, now remembered mostly for silence. Because Dawson's legend is not powered by rumor first, it is powered by dates. In 1913, the Stag Canyon Mine No. 2 disaster shook the town and the wider region, with 263 miners and 2 rescuers reported lost. Then in 1923, another major mine tragedy followed, taking roughly 120 to 123 more lives depending on the source. 2 enormous blows within about a decade. That rhythm alone can make people whisper the word curse, even if the real story is risk, labor, and an era that demanded too much from the ground and the men who worked it. The most haunting part is what survives. Much of Dawson's built world is gone. What remains most powerfully is the cemetery. Rows of white-painted iron crosses stand like an outdoor ledger of a town's cost. The cemetery is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, not because it is spooky theater, but because it is history that refuses to be politely hidden. And Dawson still has a pulse in memory. Every 2 years, former residents and descendants gather for reunions and commemorations. Hundreds return to a place that no longer lives in the usual way. That is a quiet, emotional twist. The town is gone. The community isn't fully gone. Picture walking through that cemetery under high New Mexico light. No jump scares, no haunted house tricks, just names, dates, and the feeling that an industrial dream can end so quickly that the landscape barely has time to adjust. So what feels creepier to you? A place with classic ghost stories, or a place where the facts are heavy enough to cast shadows by themselves? Number 1. Cairo, Illinois. Cairo sits at a location that feels like destiny. The southern tip of Illinois, the county seat of Alexander County. And most importantly, the meeting point of the Mississippi River and the Ohio River, 2 giant arteries, 1 small city, a place that should have been a permanent headline. For a while it was. Cairo's population peaked at 15,003 in 1920. By 2020, it was 1,033. That is not a collapse. That is a long, quiet draining. The kind of decline that doesn't look dramatic on a single day but feels chilling when you zoom out. Because Cairo isn't creepy like a ghost town with legends and jump scares. Cairo is creepy like a room that used to be loud and now echoes even when you whisper. The history here has weight. During the Civil War, this river confluence was a strategic asset, and Fort Defiance helped control vital waterways. Cairo once mattered on the national scale. That is the contrast that stings. A city that held the keys to the river now struggles to hold the attention of the road. And that is part of the modern twist. Transportation and commerce changed. River industry faded. Highways and new routes let people pass through the tri-state crossroads without truly entering Cairo's heart. The map still points here. The flow of life just learned to go around. Another crack runs through the late 1960s into the early 1970s. A long period of social tension is often cited as a factor that deepened out migration and economic decline. You don't need to turn this into spectacle. The chill is in the aftermath. When trust erodes, businesses leave. When businesses leave, families follow. The city doesn't just lose people, it loses momentum. Then there is the river itself. Living at a major confluence is beautiful. It is also a reminder that nature writes its own terms. Flood risk and climate pressure have been part of Cairo's modern narrative, adding one more weight to a place already carrying too many. Now imagine the present-day visuals. Blocks of empty storefronts, gaps where buildings used to be, a downtown that feels like it is waiting for a crowd that took a wrong turn 20 years ago. Then you drive to Fort Defiance and look out at the water. 2 rivers moving with confidence. A city on the shore trying to remember what confidence felt like. Cairo doesn't need ghosts. It has geography, history, and a slow fade that feels almost deliberate. So here is the final question of this countdown. What is more unsettling? A town with a spooky legend, or a city that should have been unstoppable, yet seems to dim itself 1 decade at a time while the rivers keep flowing like nothing happened? So that's our map of America's quiet nightmares. Not because these towns are pure evil, but because they reveal what happens when history, industry, nature, and rumor collide. Some places vanished fast. Others faded over decades. A few turned their legends into tourism. And a couple remind us that the scariest stories don't need ghosts. They just need empty streets, locked gates, and a past that never got closure. If this list proved anything, it's that creepy isn't always supernatural. Sometimes it's structural. Sometimes it's human. And sometimes it's just the feeling that a place is still keeping a secret you weren't invited to hear. Now I want to hear from you. Which town unsettled you the most, and which one would you actually visit in daylight? Drop your pick in the comments. And if you want part 2 with even stranger small towns, hit like, subscribe, and stay curious.